So at that, I want to open it up to questions and see where we are. Yes, sir.
Under your slide for types of data, I noticed you very strategically didn't have anecdotes as a type of data for IEPs. Could you please talk about the problems with anecdotes?
Yeah. So the problem with anecdotes, and you know, interestingly, because of course the only data I shared with you today were anecdotes, right? So, so the problem with anecdotes, that the reason I don't like using them is that they just take a really long time to record. So, like, I think a story is really a great way to share what children are doing, but in order to write down in any detail a field note or narrative record of what a child did is long and intensive. So it's way easier to be able to say, you know, what I'm interested in is the number of children the child played with today, and I can make check marks really easily. If I had to say, well, today we did blah, 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 and he played with blah, 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 it takes a lot longer. So I actually have colleagues that do, I'm obviously not a qualitative researcher, I have colleagues that take really beautiful, intensive, qualitative field notes, and they spend hours and hours and hours. You can't do it. It's like people who say, well, I'll videotape this and then comment from the videotape. Well, you never look at the videotape. You don't have time. If you don't have time to take checkmark data, how are you ever going to have time to do the other things? So the important thing about, you know, what I always say to my colleagues who are the qualitative researchers is I said the difference between what you do and what I do is that you cast your net broadly and bring in all the data you can, and then you ferret out after you've collected all the data what you want and what you don't want. What I do is I do that ferreting out process before, and I say, I'm interested in the number of initiations the child makes to appear, and that's all I'm going to count. Now, correct, I may not be catching the most important thing if something else really wonderful happens and all I'm looking at is initiations. So it's very important then that I pick the right thing to count before I start counting. But the main reason I don't do anecdotes is that they take too long and there's no consistency. So thank you for that question. Yes, ma'am.
I don't want to get bogged down on this, but you mentioned briefly how the visuals or visual schedules need to be forward thinking and so kids don't get bogged down. Mm-hmm. Can you just say what that would look like, or when they would be making them less independent instead of more independent? Yeah,
so I think of two things for that. One is that I try, as kids get older, that the visual schedule should be more age appropriate. So, you know, I am completely dependent on my visual schedule, but there's no Velcro involved and there's not a pocket chart, you know. So as kids get older, people get older, they should have a visual schedule that's more age appropriate. But the other thing is that I don't check my schedule unless I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So like I know their date, like I check my schedule every night before I go to bed so that I know what I have to wear the next day, right? I check my schedule just to make sure I don't have travel coming up, you know. But I don't check, but sometimes I see people who, you know, the child is making the transition to the next activity and someone says, you didn't check your schedule, go back. But they're going where they're supposed to go. They're doing it without the schedule. That's great. So schedules should help us be more independent and not less. And those are the kinds of ways I'm thinking about it.
Okay, one of the questions we have from our online audience is, do you have any suggestions for encouraging members of a team to collect data?
It's a requirement of doing your job. You know, I hate to kind of be the man and say that, but at least in the United States, you know, like whether I'm working in a school or I'm working on a insurance reimbursed program, you know, I have to have data to demonstrate what I'm doing. But then, you know, so that's one way. But again, I really do think that people are interested in knowing that what they're doing is effective. And if they actually knew that if they actually thought of data as a way to show that what they're doing is effective, and saw that the data they collected were then used to influence programmatic changes, then I think people are more interested in collecting the data. You know, it's interesting. We did this little study one time where we were trying to find out about what kind of data people took. And so we found that, like, there was almost 100% compliance to data on toilet training. Now, why was that? Well, because it was super easy to collect, because the data sheets were taped up in the bathroom and there was a pencil taped up next to it. So the materials were there, and yet it was where you're doing the data, right? So that was super easy. They also took data when challenging behaviors were involved, and I think because people knew they couldn't make changes to things unless they had the data to demonstrate that there needed to be a change, and they were really motivated to get that. So I think, you know, making sure things are super easy to collect data on, and that you have the materials. I mean, I think that's part of it.
The last question, and it's very brief, is just a question about how do you define keystone skills?
So a keystone skill is, over time, a bunch of different people have talked about pivotal skills, functional skills, keystone skills, and they're all kind of the same thing. So I think there are little differences, but to me, a keystone skill or a pivotal skill is a skill that allows you to do something else. So if you think about imitation, imitation is a pivotal skill or a keystone skill, because once you can imitate, then you can use that imitation skill to see what your friends are doing and do the same thing. Or you can use it, you know, if you're a really good observational learner, you can say, okay, I'm not really sure where I'm going, but everyone else is going that way, so I think I should go that way too. So those are what I think about keystone or pivotal skills.